A few years ago, I was hiking in the Olympic National Forest in Washington State with my 2 dogs. We were 4 days in, around 20 miles from even a known mountain road. I was camping at around 7,000 feet at night, right where the tree line began thinning out. So when we got to the campsite, which was a big open meadow on top of a secondary mountain, it was about an hour from sunset. My big dog usually runs around within proximity of the camp as I set up the tent and make dinner, etc. But I noticed this time was a bit different. He kept staring up at the steep, tree-filled mountainside, tail straight up, and barking. Not the kind of bark like when he sees a squirrel. He was definitely concerned about something. Now, the day before, I had found a note left under a rock at the last landmark, saying that there was a problem bear in the area that was harassing a group of campers a few days ago. And I myself had come across big cat tracks the day before, so I was definitely concerned that there may be more than just squirrels out there. I decided to climb some of the boulders at the foot of the hill while scouting the hillside for movement before I went to go hang my bear bag up there. Although there were trees on the hillside, the only ones that were suitable to hang my bag on were up the hill. If you don't know, a bear bag is a waterproof casing, which is used to protect food and other items from bears during camping trips. You have to hang them in trees so they can't reach them. I didn't see or hear anything, but my dog kept quietly whining like there was something up there. So while I was still concerned, I began hiking up this steep hill. It was so steep, I had to use the trees to balance and lean against so that I wouldn't go tumbling down before making it another 5 or 6 steps to the next tree. Anyway, I'm slowly making my way up this hill, hopping from tree to tree, trying to keep my balance. Then I get about 100 feet of elevation when I hear movement about 50 feet in front of me. My dog immediately goes from a deep, low growl to an aggressive bark. My heart starts pounding out of my chest, and I begin to panic. A million thoughts go racing through my head in a matter of seconds. If this was the aforementioned bear, my dog was going to try to save me, which would likely result in his death. And if I have to get off that hillside quickly, I would almost 100% trip and fall onto the boulders below. So I was feeling pretty screwed at that moment. Then I heard my smaller dog start barking and freaking out down by the campsite, which was just out of view. I had her zipped up in my tent so she wouldn't wander off while I was away. A few seconds later, I kind of snap out of it, and I take another few seconds to start putting my survival priorities in order and call my dog back to me. His name is Loki, by the way. He comes and sits against my feet as my back is against a tree, so I'm kind of stuck there at the moment. But my dog was seemingly trying to separate me from something up there, so I let him lean against me while I tried to collect myself. That's when I realized I had completely forgotten to turn my headlamp on, so I reach up so fast to turn it on, I basically end up punching myself in the face. I was having a serious adrenaline spike, so much so that my knees were beginning to shake. Once I get my lamp on, I'm getting myself ready to see a pair of eyes staring back at me. But there was nothing. But I had just heard something there. We both did. And whatever it was, didn't get away or sound like it had made it too far. I had to know what was up there. My thought process was, it's better to face it now than wait like a sitting duck all night. As I was looking up this hill, at one point, Loki lunges forward, unpinning me. He does one of those fake bluff charges at something that was about 15 feet up the hill. He was snarling and foaming at the mouth. As he does this, I finally see movement. Something was moving uphill. My dog made whatever it was blow its cover, so I'm zeroed in now. I call my dog back and silently watch. What I saw made my stomach drop. There was a man crouched about 75 feet directly above me, wearing not camouflage, but some raggedy clothing with a hood. He blended into the environment almost perfectly. It was almost like a makeshift ghillie suit, but with the face exposed. I couldn't see his eyes, and his face was covered in dirt or something, but I knew that we were staring right at each other. Our eyes locked for what seemed like several minutes. There were no words exchanged, but I felt like I was trying to subconsciously convey that I was going to stand my ground. I wanted him to know that I saw him, but I guess I was just too frightened to even speak. As I was staring at him, my small dog back at the campsite began barking her head off again. It sounded like she was scared, so I had to get off that hill before total darkness set in, or I could be seriously injured or risk dying trying to get back down. So carefully, I began making my way back down the hill with Loki, who doesn't want to leave, but he listens. Periodically, I would stop with my back against a tree holding me up and look in that direction again, just to make sure that it was clear I saw whoever it was, and they knew that. We eventually made it back down to the boulders. By the time I jumped down onto them, my other dog had stopped barking. I could only see the top of my tent from where I was. I thought she was just barking just to bark. Dachshunds tend to do that sometimes. But when I got there, I noticed that my dog had gotten out of the tent and was walking around the campsite, growling, with her tail sticking straight up. Still trying to hold it together, I thought, okay, maybe she just got her nose between the zippers and worked her way out of it. But I was certain that I had zipped it all the way closed to where she couldn't do that. Had someone come and let her out? So now, in a mixture of being terrified and pissed off, and the sudden urge of needing to do something, I reached into my day bag and pulled out my .40 and fired a single shot into the air. I then climbed into my tent with my gun next to me and waited until first light. As soon as the sun came up, I was packing my shit up and heading back down the mountain. It was all downhill, but I still couldn't cover the ground to get back to my car in one day. It was dark by the time I made it back to the previous campsite, about 4 miles away from my vehicle. Thankfully, there were other people there. We sat around the campfire they made, and I felt pretty safe and relieved. They told me they planned on heading to where I was the night before, so I told them what happened in detail. Needless to say, everyone was walking back to their cars in the morning. The thing that still creeps me out the most to this day is when I got home and started reading reviews of the same hike I was on. Other people have had similar experiences there. There was a man found dead from a fall around the same boulder range 2 years ago. And a year after that, a woman was found murdered. This happened to my husband and I about 3 years ago, in late November. It still gives us the chills to this day. While living in Seattle, my husband and I would frequently go surfing. Usually we would drive out to Nia Bay or Westport, but on this particular weekend, the surf report looked pretty messy for spots located directly on the coast. We decided instead to try hitting some spots along the Strait of Juan de Fuca. The land along the strait is scenic, but remote. You can only access it by driving along Highway 112, which runs from Port Angeles to Nia Bay. There's no cell service along most of the highway, and there's only a smattering of small towns. So we decided to try surfing along the strait at a spot called Twin. We had surfed there before and had a good lay of the land. The report showed that the waves would be the best in the early morning, so we opted to drive out the evening before and sleep in our car overnight. Since it was late November, we decided to forego paying for a camping spot and would just park somewhere along the beach. We figured that no one would be there, and we were right. When we arrived around 3:30 p.m., the only other people parked there were a young couple in a Westphalia. Nothing terribly eventful happened between our arrival and 6 p.m. We got there, made some dinner, and I took a quick walk along the beach. The only other thing that happened was just before sunset, we heard this loud whistling and saw some guy who had been walking along the highway come down the entrance road, heading toward the beach. My husband and I thought it was pretty odd, given that there's absolutely nowhere you could easily walk to along that highway. All he had with him was a tiny backpack, so he definitely wasn't hiking. He said hello to the young couple as he was walking on the beach, and they invited him to come hang out by their campfire. The last time we saw any of them was around 7 p.m. when we called it a night. I woke up about an hour later and opened the car door a bit to get some fresh air. I noticed that the young couple's vehicle was now gone, and something about them not being there unnerved me. I couldn't put a finger on why, so I just chalked it up to my paranoia from being tired and laid it back down. When I woke up next, it was close to 11 p.m., and this time I shot up so quickly that my husband woke up too. He asked me what was wrong, and I said, "Nothing. I think I just had a bad dream." He seemed completely relaxed and fell back asleep, but I stayed up for about 15 minutes, trying to listen for anything. In hindsight, my intuition was screaming at me that something was off. Since I didn't hear anything, I laid back down and really tried to focus on getting some sleep. 20 minutes later, I woke up again, and this time, my husband was already up and listening. Him sitting so still freaked me out, so I turned on the cab light and asked him what was up. Someone was tapping on the windows. I remember feeling this deep sense of dread. When I woke up a few hours ago, I noticed that other couple left. There's no one camping here, except us. At that, we both put on our shoes, grabbed flashlights, a knife, and pepper spray, then opened the car doors. Total silence, pitch black darkness. My husband started up toward the trees behind us to look around, while I stood by our car and shined a light down onto the beach. I saw no one and sat on the back bumper while my husband continued his search. I checked to see if I had cell service. Nope, not a chance. Maybe 2 minutes went by before he returned, walking fast. "We need to leave. There's a car parked up by the exit road. It's just sitting there with the lights off and the ignition on. I couldn't tell if there was anyone inside." In no more than 60 seconds, we threw everything in the front seats into the back where we had been sleeping and began driving back up toward the entrance road. But we didn't want a chance taking that exit and driving by that car. We peeled out of there, going down some back roads. However, in a moment of disorientation, my husband turned the wrong way and went down the highway, heading toward Nia Bay. As we realized we were going the wrong way, I looked behind us, and lo and behold, there was the car, now with its lights on. A few seconds later, it was tailgating us, trying to ram us off the road. I practically screamed, "What the fuck are you doing? There's nowhere to turn around." The highway was narrow, with forest on one side and ocean on the other. Luckily, we saw a small dirt road coming up on the left. I remembered my husband just saying, "Fuck, fuck, fuck," then cutting hard to the left, tires screeching. As soon as we turned, the pursuing car just kept going the same direction. We then took off back down the highway going about 90, heading back towards Port Angeles. Thankfully, no one followed us the rest of the way back. I still feel deeply disturbed when thinking about the intentions of whoever was in that car. Back in 2005, when I was 18, I had just dropped out of high school. I was about halfway through the school year, and I just didn't have the credits I needed to graduate. I also was dealing with some health problems and was altogether frustrated with my life. I was more concerned with drinking than I was with finishing school. So I dropped out and bought a plane ticket and went to go live with my cousin and his girlfriend in Washington State. They lived in a town about an hour north of Seattle. I also had some friends that were a year older than me living in Seattle, and I would occasionally drive down to the city and spend a few days with them, going to concerts and things like that. After a particular stint in Seattle, I decided to head back north to my cousin's place. Me being the financially impaired individual that I was, I left Seattle without a dollar to my name. As I was getting onto the highway, I noticed that I was very low on gas. I figured that I can make it though. But of course, about 20 miles short of my exit, my car begins to sputter. Luckily for me, I was coming up to a rest area, so I pull in to get to the payphone to call the very few contacts that I had. I had no money, so I had to make a collect call to get a hold of my cousin, who happened to be 3 hours away from his hometown, and drunk. No luck there. So I called up his girlfriend, and she doesn't answer. Everyone that I knew in Seattle didn't own a car, so I'm kinda screwed for now. My cousin said that he was coming home in the morning and would pick me up on his way through. So it looks like I'm spending the night at this rest stop. So I get settled with my seat reclined and using my hoodie as a blanket. I'm there for about 20 minutes when a van pulls into the rest area. It was one of those Chevy Astro vans. It parks, and out gets your typical creeper. I would say he was about 5'5", pudgy, balding, and wore a thick pair of glasses like Jeffrey Dahmer. He begins walking around the parking area, glancing into all the parked cars. There were 3 others aside from mine. He then slowly walks right in front of my car and just stares me down for what seems like an hour. At this point, I'm pretty sure my future involves me being referenced in a documentary about serial killers. So the creeper gets back into his van and parks it to where he's behind me, but on the other side of the parking lot. I was parked facing the bathrooms, and behind him was a wooded area. By this time, I'm no longer reclined and relaxed. I'm now sitting up, wide awake, and I'm not taking my eyes off of this shithead. I look into my side mirror, and I see him just sitting in his van, staring at my car. This goes on for about 2 hours. He would occasionally get out of his van and go stand in the darkness of the woods, but I could still tell he was watching me because I saw the cherry on his cigarette light up as he inhaled. At this point, I'm pretty on edge, and I have to take a piss like crazy, but there was no way in hell that I was going to walk into that bathroom with this guy around. I decided to call State Patrol and have them kick this guy out of here. So I call them up and explain the situation, and they say that they will be sending a trooper through shortly. So I hang up the phone, and I'm kind of pacing around while keeping an eye on this creep. The payphone then rings. I'm thinking it was a State Patrol calling back for some reason, so I answer. Hello? Do you want to have a good time? I didn't respond. I just stood there in shocked silence. Let me show you a good time. What the fuck? Hell no. I slammed the receiver down. The damn creeper has the payphone number and was calling me from the forest. I'm slightly terrified at this point, and I'm kind of frozen, but ready to run 1,000,000 miles an hour if I had to. I've got my eye on the woods, and the phone rings again. I can't decide if I want to answer or not, but I didn't want to miss the state patrol if they were calling me back for some reason. So I answer, but I don't say anything. "Come on, I don't want to have to hurt you. I can even give you some money." At this point, this piece of shit has just threatened me, so I immediately go into rage mode. I start quickly for my car when I remember there's an axe handle in the back, for situations just like this, I suppose. As I'm walking back toward my car, the creeper emerges from the forest and begins making his way toward me. I get to my car, grab the axe handle, and start towards the sky, pointing it directly at him. "You better get back into your van and get the hell out of here, or I'm gonna bash your skull in." He stops in his tracks, stares right at me, just kind of assessing me. He then turns around and gets back into his van, and slowly drives away, all the while not taking his eyes off of me. I am now shaking all over due to the adrenaline. When the trooper finally arrives, I tell him the whole story, and he takes my information and says that he can give me a ride to the Denny's up the road. It would be safer to spend the night there. He then asked if we could first go to the other side of the highway to see if the creep had just switched rest areas. I agree. So as soon as we pull into this other rest area, lo and behold, there was the van. The trooper approaches the van and is talking to the guy for about 5 minutes. I can tell the trooper was giving him the third degree, sticking his finger in his face and raising his voice. The trooper returns and tells me the situation. Apparently, there was nothing he could do to charge the guy. That seemed odd to me, because he had threatened me over the phone and was basically soliciting sex at a rest stop, but I suppose I couldn't prove it was him that called me. The guy didn't have a license. He claimed a friend had dropped him off and was waiting for him to return. The trooper then told him that if he was still there when he passed back through, he would arrest him for trespassing, and if any other troopers saw him, he would be arrested for driving without a license. He also told me that he saw several pairs of binoculars and a large bag of candy sitting in his front seat. How original. So I get dropped off at Denny's, and my cousin eventually picks me up, and I tell him what happened. We have a good laugh about it, and that's the end of the story, right? No. When we get back to that rest area the next day with a can of gas, I noticed that there was a note under one of my wipers. It was from that damn creeper. It was written in a form of poem. I can't remember what it said exactly, but it went something like this. "You should have shut your mouth, you stupid little bitch. Somebody should have taught you to never go and snitch. You had better get back on your mama's tit." I can't remember more, but this went on for several pages. The guy had cut all the brake lines and everything else he could underneath the car. We called up the troopers again, and they came and took the note, and I gave my statement. I didn't even own that car. It was a friend of mine's who had been visiting from my home state of Minnesota. He wanted to buy a car while he was here and take a road trip back to Minnesota. After what happened, he decided against it and left the car there. I told him that I would make plans to get it later. I didn't stay in Washington much longer after that. I spoke to an investigator one more time. They knew who the guy was, but nothing could be done. I was over it and just wanted to move on. For the short time that I was in Washington State after that night, my cousin and I would pull into every rest stop we passed, hoping to find this guy. In retrospect, it was probably a good thing we never saw him again, because we were dead set on fucking him up.
There's always a reason to be afraid.